network here at Usaebn. We're also on the web. Our main page is www.usaebn.org, and we're also on Facebook, facebook.com/USAEBN. Today's show, we've got a special guest calling in today. We've got a monthly guest that we have, Nancy from Wisconsin, who was on a month ago talking about survival mindset, sort of the psychology behind readiness and being prepared, something that, kind of went by last month, talking about survival mindset. And this month we are talking about earth changes, specifically earth movement. Welcome back to Situational Preparedness, Nancy.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm all geared up to talk about plate movements and why they move as they do, earth plates.
Now, I just want to mention, too, when you talk about plates, we're talking about tectonic plates. The different areas of the Earth's crust are separated like a puzzle, and these plates, like the Pacific plate, are quite large in area, but also are quite active as well. And when we're looking at the big picture of this, it's like I said before I brought you on, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around what's actually going on. So if you could bring us up to speed on kind of your theory or your practice of what you've seen, that'd be great.
Yeah, and it's not really my theory, it's what geologists espouse.
Right.
Okay. Just a quick touch base to way back when the Earth was projected to be somewhere other than in its current orbit and got walloped. So it had a big hole where the Pacific is now. And what was remaining as land was called Pangea, Pangea. And you can look that up. And it was all one big lump, which began to break apart and drift apart as the globe slowly kind of like tried to even itself out, even fill in the Pacific and spread the land around. The reason land plates float and are not part of the magma is because their rock is lighter weight than the magma underneath, and that's why it's like floating on rafts on top of molten lava or magma. The first thing I want to touch on is why, and it's timely because Nepal just had that 7.9, and was devastating. It affected Mount Everest, where they had a landslide. Had an avalanche, and Nepal itself, where the quake hit, the epicenter, came up a meter, 3 feet or so. India was just calculated to have been driven under the Himalayas 12 feet. So what causes this? Well, if you look at the maps of Pangea, India combined with Australia it wasn't where it is today in the past when Pangea was breaking apart and floating around. India began, the reason it's called its own continent when it seems to be attached to Russia and China, why is it called its own continent? Because it was separate and it floated to where it's jamming into, the China-Russia continent, and as it does that, it's jamming under, pushing the rock up, which causes the Himalayas, where it's the highest. 26,000 feet is Mount Everest, the highest in the world. So what is interesting is that after this 7.9 in Nepal, I checked the buoys. It's NOAA puts that site up, and you can see where the water is either rising or falling beyond what the tidal expectations are. And the buoys throb on this map when that happens. Well, the buoys, not only in the Indian Ocean by Bangladesh, where you would expect to see them throbbing, but way over by the Philippines, outlining the Philippines quake, and up toward Japan, all the buoys were throbbing. Well, what would cause that? Well, the jolt into the Eurasian plate, which carries Europe all the way across Russia into China, etc., and even a good portion of Japan, the Eurasian plate bumped apparently the jamming under of India made the whole thing bump. So that caused the water to go boom, and there we are. Now, more than the water? Yes. On the same day, or was it a day later? No, it was the same day, April
Same day.
25th, Japan had some new land arising on its coastline. It was actually, it was not like new land rose from the sea exactly. It was a big landslide on the coast there of the northmost island, and as that landslide slid down and under, you got it slid under the soft seabed, which rose up. So this old woman was collecting seaweed, and she, by the time she was done, a couple of hours later, she was walking on sea urchins and all kinds of things that had risen out of the sea, and it seemed rather amazing. But this is just to show how one plate's movement affects another.
Nancy, can I jump in real quick on that?
You betcha.
I also want to. I saw that from reports now that we're getting more information. We don't here at Usaebn. We don't really focus on not so much numbers of fatalities, injured, that sort of thing. We talk more about preparedness and the bigger scope of things, which why we have you on periodically. But I also want to mention that from the data that I've seen from the Nepal quake, that you said 12 feet of movement, India subducting under. And I saw a report that the geological sciences group over there are expecting another movement of upwards of 33 to 50 feet, or I guess it would be 10 to 15 meters of movement yet of subduction based on what happened in Japan, because that was a similar 33 to 50 foot rise when that landslide went, that these scientists are putting it together that there might be a compensation back over to Nepal. So Nepal's not out of the woods yet.
I'm sure
or India for that matter.
Oh, that's for sure. And it's been called the place where big plate movements start, because there seems to be, all the plates are bumping into each other. They're, like you mentioned, the puzzle, and it all fits together. Well, in order to get any movement anywhere, something has to give, and the place that gives the least is India, because it has to shove under the Himalayas, and this is not easy. Obviously, it's been going on for some time because it's so high, but it's traumatic, and so when that happens, all the other plates in the world kind of adjust, and then we start again. Now, why is this action happening? The Pacific is closing. The Atlantic is pulling apart. Why? Well, it's the natural progression, as the globe turns and the plates move around to equalize. The Atlantic obviously has been pulling apart because it has this big rift from Iceland. It's like a big S all the way down toward the tip of South America and South Africa. And this has been pulling apart. You can see this. Fresh magma is hardened, and what's more, there's a lot of other effects that the geology of the Earth fairly screams that this has been going on for a while. Like what, you say? Well, like if you look at an elevation map of the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, you can see off the coast of the U.S. that I think they call it the continental shelf. It's been pulled down. You can see that it's not that deep. It's shallow for hundreds of miles out. And they have identified buffalo bodies out there, tree trunks out there, and you can see that life at one point, this was above the waves, and it's now below. Well, go across the ocean over to the UK, and you find the same sort of thing. You find that there were land bridges from Scotland across to Sweden and Denmark, etc., to Sweden. It was not as deep as it is now. It's sinking. And even the Norway fjords, I've been told if you look down under the water, by gum, they were above the waves. Now, what's causing that? Well, as the Atlantic pulls apart, the support for land on either side of that rip weakens, and there's a droop. So it's drooping.
Okay. Yeah, I never really thought about it that way. And it's like if there is a rise in the center, there's going to be a valley where the crust naturally falls down, kind of like wet cardboard almost would be. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
yeah. Well, I suppose now if you have a tent and
mm-hmm.
and you normally have tent poles all over the place, and you take some of those tent poles away from the center, it's going to droop, and that's that's what's happening because, as you pull. Well, if you look at the horizon and consider the Earth to be a ball, and you say, take a slice off, there's this tension on the crust of the Earth, just like there is in a drop of water. There's that
mm-hmm.
tension that pulls the drop of water to be kind of roundish. Well, as the Atlantic pulls apart, it's going to be more straight across instead of roundish. And if it's straight across, it's going to be pulling the edges of these land masses down. And boy, that's happened. Now talk about the Caribbean. There's all this speculation about where was Atlantis, because there was a land bridge, from Florida to Venezuela. If you look at a map, a satellite map that shows depth of water, you can just see that. You can see the land
mm-hmm.
bridge, where it went. And then we have the roads off Bimini, where there's neatly laid stones that are clearly not just accidentally there at the sea bottom. So there was life there in the Caribbean, in land that is now under the waves. For some reason, that went down.
Do you think, in your observations of the Caribbean, and I've noticed recently seeing more and more reports, and maybe this touches on the Keys and Miami as well, that not only is not Venezuela, but Indonesia and that area sinking and losing elevation faster than the actual raising of the water, according to the climate change theory. And also in the Caribbean as well, aren't they, as well as Miami, losing shoreline and sinking as well, and that's well documented?
Well, I have to disagree with you there. The land is sinking faster in certain areas, but if it were a sea level rise, everybody would be affected because water seeks its level.
Okay.
And it's not. You go to most of the cities of the world are right on the shoreline. Click them off. There's Paris, there's London, New York City, Miami, L.A., Hong Kong. They are, and they're not saying, "Oh my goodness, water is rising up our streets."
Right.
You go down to Indonesia, and they've had a problem for the past few years. And I'm saying very few, just 2 or 3, where seawater comes in. They say, "Oh, it's the rains; they're terrible," and consequently, the seawater is mixing in here with our cropland. Well, the rains didn't cause that. You can actually see it on the satellite photos. Why is it going under? Because as the plate holding India, which includes Australia, they are bound there. They're one funny looking plate, but it's kind of like a big curve. And Indonesia, from Sumatra, Java, over to New Guinea, is not on that plate. Well, as this plate, for instance, went under Nepal just recently, and India shoved under the Himalayas another 12 feet. India is having problems, with sea level rising, and Bangladesh too, because it's not only pushing under the Himalayas, it's pushing down. Now, what happens is that big curve pushes down. Well, Indonesia is tucked into that curve, and it gets dragged down too. And it's a secondary reaction to the India Australia plate going down. Is Indonesia is going down. Now, why would that be affecting the Caribbean? Well, if the Atlantic pulls apart, which it is doing, as we can see historically, right? If it's pulling apart, you can take, in the analysis of Pangea, you can take South America and tuck it up against Africa, and the bulge of off Brazil will tuck into that curve, and the western side of Africa very nicely. They obviously were two pieces of the puzzle that are pulling apart. But as the Atlantic continues to pull apart, what happens to South America, which is shaped like an ice cream cone? The top part of it is free to move. It's rounded, but the tip cannot move. Why? It's nailed to the big Antarctic plate, and also it has various plates to the west of it, Nazca and Cocos, which are more toward the top part and kind of touch on Central America and the top part of South America. And when the Atlantic widens, South America wants to tip over towards the Pacific. It is free to do that. It's been loosened up along the east side. As it does so, it has a hump right there at New Zealand at Venezuela, where if you look at it, that part is, as it would roll toward the west, it would shove the Caribbean plate down, and that process is happening. There are various, it's kind of subtle, it's not been real dramatic as yet, but Trinidad, for instance, is being torn apart because the plate borders go right through it, and you can actually see that tearing apart happening. And then they talk about how soggy it is right through the middle there where the tear is. Well, there you are. So remember last week when Nepal happened, we also had something happen in Chile. There was a big volcano, exploded, and it's not like it was one of these inactive volcanoes, and nobody thought it would happen. I mean, it's been known to go off, but usually it rumbles and clears its throat and carries on first. But it just blew, and it was, if you take a look at the map, which I have done, you can see that it's right where the Nazca platelet, which is to the west of South America, comes round and touches into the spine of the Andes. That's at that exact point. That's where that volcano is. So what happened? South America rolled in response to the Nepal quake, the plates kind of going and adjusting all over the world. And as South America, at the top of it, rolled a little bit, it was like somebody's elbow jammed into that point in the spine of the Andes in Chile and blew that volcano. So now we had, just a couple of days ago, high waves in Acapulco for no reason. No storm, no quake. It was washing in, practically washing all the cars away. What causes that? Well, the Cocos plate is right there. That's another little platelet that is getting shoved as the South America top of it rolls and pushes the Caribbean, etc. So water, something happened out there in the Pacific, between the Cocos and the Pacific plates, where seismographs do not exist, so we don't know what happened. Plate movement happened, and the water didn't have as much place to be. The basins, it had to redistribute and went in all directions, including up onto Acapulco.
Yeah, I think that when we're talking about all of these plates moving around and the earthquakes, some of these spots that we're talking about, especially in the Caribbean chain and the Indonesian, Bangladesh area, there's a lot of places that are not highly monitored with seismographs, I should say, in those areas. So you have to watch the the bigger signs, which would be sloshing of the oceans, as you said before, the NOAA weather buoy system, which you can find online. They have various buoys all over the world, and they will show depressions as well as elevation of the water level compared to tides, and that's how they sort of see the predictions for tsunamis. But also, when you're looking at every person's day, when they're seeing, in Acapulco, as you said, with all of this inundation of water sloshing and no wave movement to coincide with it, or wind movement, or rain, hurricane, or otherwise generated rain, we're talking about a bigger change here, and we're going through heightened earth changes around the world, and I think focusing on some of these areas, such as where the plates come together, or where they might be dipping down or subducting or ripping apart, is a good way to help folks out there learn if they're in a spot that they should be looking a little bit harder at what's going on with the elevation, or what's going on with water and that sort of thing. So I think this is a great discussion. Is all I'm saying. But
it's helpful.
Not that folks in those areas are going to be listening to this show, but you never know. It could happen.
It's helpful to know how the plates move and why they move, because it's like a scripted drama. When Pangea broke up and everything started moving, if you have subduction in one area, like why do we have the Andes? Well, obviously because South America has been moving to the west and jamming over the Nazca plates or the Cocos plates. Otherwise we wouldn't have those mountains there, and that this is going to happen in the future, so that when this happens, it shouldn't be a surprise. It's expected, etc. So in some areas we have. So if South America can roll to the west, what about Africa? It's free to move more also, as the Atlantic rips apart, which it's constantly doing, and we don't hear about it because it's out there, where there aren't any seismographs. But we'll have a movement, like South America, and say, well, I don't know why this happened. Well, if you were down there in the Atlantic Rift, the big rip, you would know. But Africa rolls to the east. The top part of it does. Once again, the bottom part is nailed pretty firmly to Antarctica, but the top part is free to move. Well, what happens to the Mediterranean when that happens? Did you know that the Mediterranean in the past was a swamp? It was not a sea as it is today. Now, they've gone through documenting, like the Black Sea. They say, at one point, this was, there's ships buried, or there's various creatures that live there, or things in the bottom, and they can tell that the salt and the fresh were different, and doing all this analysis. And the bottom line, and then they say, well, the Mediterranean poured through. It was once fresh water, and then the Mediterranean poured through at one point. But you can actually see, again, if you look from satellite imagery, that the Mediterranean has been sinking. So do we have problems today? Yes, we do. We have a widening gap in the Mediterranean, where if you look at the Red Sea, which at one point wasn't even much there, it might have been just a river, and the African Rift Valley. Why do we have the Rift Valley running down that southeast part of Africa, where there's lots of volcanoes, and you can see, that it's pulling apart as Africa rolls its top part. It's pulling, it's almost disemboweling Africa at that place and pulling it down, to where the lava can get to the surface, and there's big crevasses that open up. There was something dramatic happened about 5 or 10 years ago. A helicopter landed because this big crevasse was opening up, almost right under its feet, like something out of a Hollywood movie. And they got in the helicopter and took off quick. It's a living thing. These plate movements are a living thing. So the Red Sea wasn't that wide, And recently, I think within the last 5 years, there's been a volcano that popped up in the middle of the Red Sea toward Yemen, in that direction, bubbling lava. So this is an active process, and as it pulls apart, you're going to have portions in the Mediterranean above that rip point, the plate border, and below in Africa that will droop. So now we're over to North America, where this process is going on also. A little closer to home, yeah, Andre?
Well, I will say that, can I mention something real quick? As far as North America goes, we have an interesting plate tectonic mix in North America, with the North American craton kind of where I live, the Wisconsin area, Minnesota. It's kind of teardrops into the northern part of the Midwest, but also you've got action to the south in not only the New Madrid going through the center right of the country, but also action volcanoes, multiple volcanoes in Mexico and Guatemala, and then not to mention California and the Pacific Northwest. So I'm interested to hear with everything else that's going on with the other plates. It's got to end up somewhere, and it seems like the North America especially has a lot of different aspects to its plate where it has to do a lot of different things just by the nature of the way it's put together.
Yeah, and it is different because it has a flat top. And I say this, because if you look down from the North Pole and you outline the plates, you can go from the Japan area right through the Arctic over to Greenland, Iceland, etc., and draw a straight line. Which means it can't roll. If South America can roll to the west and Africa can roll, to the east, well, then you have the whole thing with Europe all the way through Russia to China, etc., which is one big solid landmass. And that, if anything, is getting kind of, as the Pacific closes and the Atlantic widens, they have stretch problems over there, which means land pulling apart, where trains, will derail because of the zigzagging tracks, or big crevasses will open, or sinkholes. And China has terrible sinkholes, but North America isn't just being pulled apart. It has this bizarre thing of being pulled into what I'll call a bow, and this is as the Atlantic pulls apart. Southern part, we're talking the North American plate, circles round and includes Mexico, and then bumps into the San Andreas Fault and runs up through California, and then it does some little weird things over there around the Aleutian Islands and the like. But mainly, that's sort of like an appendage that's small. But the big part of it is flat on the top, rounded through, the Atlantic, and then straight line up to San Andreas. Now, as Mexico moves to the west, which it would be doing, along with South America, the big ice cream cone, what happens to the rest of the plate, which is nailed at the top and refuses to move? It cannot move. It's a flat top, right? And I mean, you gotta see that to understand what I'm saying. It's no small thing. So what happens is it becomes a bow, and the outer edge is Quebec down along the East Coast, through the Gulf, all the way, and even parts of Canada. The whole thing is pulled into a bow. It's like if you pull on a bow, it's the curved part. That's the bow, not the string. And this puts stress where, and they do have more earthquakes along the bow part. Breaking water mains, breaking gas mains, this kind of, and a huge ripping open in Mexico and Arizona, crevasses that will just, appear overnight and practically a mile long and 20 feet deep. And people say, oh, why did this happen? It's dry. Obviously, the land is dry, but you just don't have. And remember when we had the booms in Wisconsin, Andre, and they started in Clintonville, and they worked their way down the state, kind of along a rock strata, and ended up in Baraboo, which is near me, and people were saying, and it was in the papers, oh, it's got to be fireworks. I never did find fireworks. Maybe a transformer exploded. No, that didn't happen.
My favorite, frostquakes. My favorite was frostquakes. I'm like, it's July, all right? So, come on, guys. You got to do better than that.
I have some of these recorded, and it went a straight line. I mean, it went from Clintonville and it kept marching toward Madison, kind of, didn't get all the way there. It stopped at Baraboo. But why? Well, if you take a look at a map, look at Wisconsin. Here you have the peninsula with Green Bay tucked in the yaw part, at the bottom of it. And if you follow that line down along the peninsula, here's Green Bay, and you're moving down toward Madison, there's various lakes. Don't we have like Fond du Lac Lake or something? And then Madison itself has 2 or 3 lakes. Now, it's ripping open. Wisconsin is ripping open. It's like if you take the peninsula and go, and pull it. So why is it pulling like that? Well, the New Madrid has left its mark, in many ways, but that's one of them. The Seaway itself, with all the way open to the sea, this is, if you take that bow and you go to the extreme, the Seaway is going to rip open a lot more than it is. Wisconsin is going to rip open. And what caused all that rumbling in the Black Hills out there? You take a line, you go all the way from the Seaway, all the way through. This is a continent-wide trauma caused by the Boeing action.
Now, when you speak of the New Madrid and you say the Seaway, you're referring to the St. Lawrence Seaway and the upper Great Lakes as they go above Ohio and Pennsylvania towards Canada. The St. Lawrence Seaway is not man-made, obviously. It's a connection of the Great Lakes, but also it is a natural divide of the upper end of the rip of the New Madrid seismic zone, which goes from the Gulf down by Louisiana, follows the Mississippi, and then cuts right to the Ohio River Valley, basically, and not exactly. But you can see it if you're looking at a topographical map of the United States. You can see where the rip has happened before. Definitely.
Yes.
I mean, it's there.
Yes. Exactly. And the New Madrid is part and parcel of this, because this kind of a Boeing stress is going to put stress on the weak points. Well, obviously, Seaway is a weak point. It has ripped before. You take a look at the Finger Lakes in New York State, they look like somebody took that land and pulled it apart, which is what happened, as the Boeing stress was doing that. But the New Madrid fault line runs, up along the Mississippi, and then just under Chicago and Michigan, it makes a turn, not exactly a 90-degree turn, but more or less runs under the Seaway through Ohio and on toward the New England states. There is a sister fault line that joins down there somewhere like in Alabama, and people have different theories as to exactly where it joins, but the point is, when the New Madrid goes, this other fault line joins in, and it runs up the East Coast, east of the Appalachian Mountains, all the way, through and up to Boston, where the last New Madrid adjustment rang church bells. Now, I was took a vacation once in Savannah and Charleston, visited those cities, and there was these odd bolts holding buildings together, metal rods that would go from one end of the building all the way through to the other end with big bolts, right? What's that? Oh, that was after the New Madrid. They were trying to hold the building together.
Oh, okay.
So they didn't have to razz it. So recently, I think it was a couple months ago, we had a quake swarm in Connecticut. And I remember Michio Kaku was asked what what caused that? It was such an odd place. Well, it was right where this East Coast fault line ends, right there in Boston area, where the church bells rang. And he said, well, probably the New Madrid. And the talking head was very upset with him and said, oh, come on, give us some good news. No, we're not here with good news. And this is all getting active and giving lots of signs. And just a couple of days ago, we had a 4.2 in Michigan. Well, that wasn't very far. Was it Kalamazoo? That wasn't very far from where the New Madrid fault line curves. It touches close to Chicago and runs under Michigan. And there it is. And so when that happens and the New Madrid rips because of the bow, because the North American plate is pulled in a diagonal, if the southeast part of it, or the whole eastern portion, from we're talking about Memphis to the East Coast and all the way, if that would move northeast and the rest to the west of the Mississippi, etc., and the Midwest would move southwest, you get rid of that bowing pull, that bowing tension. And the New Madrid fault line is a big weak point. Why is that? In plates, you do not have homogeneous rock strata. Where it's weak and thin, it sags, and that's where the water collects, and that's where our rivers are. We are saggy there because the crust is thin, and that's why the water pools there, and it becomes the river bottoms. And the whole Mississippi, all the way down, is a saggy, weak place in the crust, and that's what's going to rip. And the New Madrid will allow this bowing stress to be relieved.
With that being said, Nancy, too, we're looking at some of these other quakes, not only the Connecticut swarm, and when we say quake swarm or earthquake swarm, we're talking not like a swarm of bees, but kind of similar to that. It's a term meaning many quakes in one specific area, not necessarily foreshocks or aftershocks of the same event, but separate events contained within the same time frame. Like we've been seeing quake swarms on the borders of California and Nevada over the past couple of years at some dormant volcanoes. We've been seeing quake swarms in Oklahoma, which is at the kind of the corner of where the New Madrid passes by, and also with the quake swarm we're talking about in Connecticut, that's the top of the sister fault, as well as the top of ultimately the New Madrid adjustment will involve all that area. What do you think about? I saw a report coming out of LA, I believe it was LA Times, saying that some of these earthquakes that are happening in the middle part of the United States, and some of these earthquakes associated with hydrofracturing of rock, say the injection wells, specifically pushing wastewater into the crust, causing earthquakes. Those that like oil and oil dollars say it's not happening, and the other side of the coin of why are we pumping millions of gallons of water deep into the earth? There's the other side of the fence, and I'm not sure. It's hard for me as an observer of some of these things. I follow seismic relatively well, and I have a good understanding of what's going on, and follow it daily. But when you're seeing all these earthquakes in areas like Irving, Texas, Oklahoma every day. Now they started a couple of years ago as 2s, 2.2s, 2.3s. Now they're daily 4s, magnitude 4s. They're increasing in intensity. Do you think some of these, in your opinion, do you think some of these earthquakes in the Midwest are attributed to hydrofracturing or the fracking of rock from the oil company?
No. And my argument is as follows. Where was it before? This has been going on for decades. I mean, this is not a new practice. And it hasn't
No, it's not a new technology at all.
That's right. And the increase wasn't there before. It's like global warming is causing the sea levels to rise. Well, water seeks its level. How come all these cities on the water level are having flooding, where Jakarta has to call the Netherlands guys down to say, how are we going to keep the seawater out? And they constantly have, 3 or 4 feet of water in their main streets there. You know, it's a sad excuse, but apparently plate movement is a scary thing. You know, but here's the point to remember: you can figure it out. You can figure out what is happening, where it has happened before historically. It's written in the geology, and where you should be for safety. You know, if you're going to be someplace that's not going to be safe, you can see it. If you're in a place that's going to be, you know, pulled down, or tremendous mountain building is going to happen, you're going to be rumpled like they were in Nepal. You can see it. You know, I mean, they're sitting on a time bomb. You know, I know that they can't just pick up and move, but my point is, you can learn from history. The geology is speaking to you. Now, one thing, so I don't agree that they're fracking, and for that reason, you know, how come it wasn't there before? I think, you know, to some degree, we're being told all this stuff because that there are earth changes, and the people, you know, uh, the powers that be, as they always say,
right.
They don't want panic. Yeah. They don't want people to say, "What do you mean this isn't getting worse? What do you mean?" People want an answer. They want an explanation. They say, "Oh, all right, just beat on the oil and gas companies and get them to stop fracking, and then it'll all go away." But it won't. One thing that was interesting to note was a methane gas analysis. It was a heat signature from some satellite, and that showed the four corners over there, and was it Colorado and New Mexico and blah blah blah, and it was very hot, and it was you know, and it was like, well, why do we have methane? I mean, it's the middle of the desert. There's no city there. There's no pollution there. You know, it made no sense. But if you analyze the Continental Divide, runs right through there. Now, what is the Continental Divide? The Continental Divide is where every time the mountain range on the western side of North America, where there's a lot of subduction, it rumples across the plains. The mountains are actually pushed across the plains. Some of them go for a ride. You know, they don't, depending on how the rock stratas are laid, the one rock strata may slide across another. And historically, there are analyses that have been done. Mountains that, you know, they determined they used to be like 8 miles over there, but they just went for a ride over the plains. Well, that's where this kind of press is happening because of the bowing stress on the North American plate, and therefore, you know, that press rock will rumple, and there's trapped vegetation where there was stuff riding over the plains. Well, what happened to all the grasslands that were on the plains, and now they've got rock stratas or whatever on top of them? If there's a bowing stress and there's cracking, you know, that rotten methane does not need oxygen. Methane forms pools underground. It's anaerobic. That rotting happens without oxygen, and when it gets released to the air, poof, it goes up and it can explode. But that's where that methane is coming from, the bowing stress. They know the bowing stress in North America is increasing. They know that the new Madrid is very restless, and there's a lot of people wondering about why 5 Walmarts closed and why Jade Helm is going on, you know, from July through September, I believe it is. Right. And they say, boy, that's it. And Obama's going to declare martial law and take away our guns.
Oh, yeah.
Or something along those lines.
Chinese are going to invade us.
Yeah, something like that.
It's probably got a lot more to do.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
go ahead. It's got a lot more to do with. Yeah. Go ahead.
Your turn.
New Madrid. They're watching the methane in the four corners, and they're watching all this stuff, and they're saying, "Oh boy, you know, are we going to have not necessarily the big ones, but are we going to have some trouble here?" Because the Walmart closures are Oklahoma, Texas, and there was one in North Florida. or Florida, and New Madrid will start from Memphis south to the Gulf because of the rock strata is softer there, and that's where the ripping would start. Now you go.
Okay. I was going to say that it's my turn now. What's interesting about the Walmart thing, it's got now the Walmart closures tied in with Jade Helm. There's no official report from any powers that be or government officials out there that Walmarts are connected to Jade Helm, which is a military exercise that's coming up, as you said, from July till September, which is interesting timing with everything else. A lot of traffic on the internet going from anywhere from the Rapture to New Madrid to China invading us from the south. What I will say, though, from a factual standpoint, I was on a radio show last week, locally, WORT, and we were talking about it was fresh there, too. We were talking about Walmart closures as well. Walmart participated with with FEMA and local emergency operating agencies in 2012 and 2013. They participated in actual exercise simulating a New Madrid adjustment, and they tested their infrastructure and their emergency systems in conjunction with the government. This is back in 2012, 2013. They've been with Walmart is a southern-based company based in Arkansas, so they do have a lot of their larger stores and distribution centers down in that area. So it bodes for them as a company to be prepared for some of these big changes if that's going to affect where they have most of their infrastructure. That being put aside, I don't know why they're closing Walmarts, because Walmarts don't close. What happens is if they close a Walmart, they're opening one across the street and they're moving to a bigger one. That's usually how it goes. It's like Starbucks. So it's just kind of baffling, and that's why there's so much traffic on the internet about these things going together with the Walmarts. But when you look at the bigger picture, Walmart is protecting their assets just like anybody else would if they knew that there's potentially a risk to their assets, such as a New Madrid adjustment, which, like clockwork, happens every 200 years. If you look back from the last major adjustment, it was 1811, 1812. And there's a lot of folks out there that are on the social media as well talking about New Madrid. Well, it won't be as bad as the last one. No, it'll be worse because there's people living there now. We're talking about 1811, 1812. Yeah, there's a lot more people.
So now, like speculation would be that they're getting ready to be able to hand out tents and survival equipment to a lot of people that might be in a city that just became rubble, and if you've got them in Oklahoma and Texas and North Florida, you wouldn't want them to be closer to the New Madrid, like Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, etc., or Arkansas. Maybe you have to pick up people and move them, by the hundreds, by the thousands or tens of thousands to someplace. And Walmarts are big distribution centers. Well, maybe they're going to distribute survival equipment after a disaster. And if the disaster doesn't happen by October, we might hear something different. But you're right. The analysis done on them was plumbing. All of a sudden, people were told, "Don't come back to work tomorrow. We're going to compensate you, but that's it. The store is closed." And some of these were new stores, some were older, and they didn't make any sense, the excuse. And then they said plumbing, they have to fix the plumbing. And they said, but no permits have been signed out. There's no, you go through, you're going to do that. You have chance to give people a little warning. You won't have a job in a month or 2 weeks. And so none of that made sense. And it still doesn't. But if we have a New Madrid quake, it'll make sense. Yeah. Something else about the New Madrid, in the Mississippi bridges are going to be ripped. If you pull the Mississippi at a diagonal, look at and it's not just cars and trucks going over the bridge. Take a look at the oil and gas distribution from the Gulf, from the Houston area, big pipelines going across the Mississippi and up, to the east coast of the United States, where a huge percentage of the United States populace lives. And how do we know that these bridges? Well, it's only logical. But remember when the I-35 in Minneapolis broke? And they said, there was rusty bolts. That's another thing, like global warming and fracking and rusty bolts, right? Well, there was a video cam on the southern portion that saw what happened to that bridge before it flew to the western side and crumpled, and that Mississippi River there widened by about 50 feet. It says the NTSB says one part of the bridge shifted 50 feet as it fell, while other sections collapsed in place. And this camera caught the fact that it was being pulled at a diagonal, and it ripped, apart. The Mississippi pulled apart. So the thing to worry about here is, what about all the oil and gas distribution, the ripped Mississippi bridges, and the fact, as you mentioned, these cities are not built to withstand earthquakes, not like the West Coast or Japan, who sort of try to anticipate that. This is brick buildings. These are older structures, and they're just going to become rubble.
Yeah, that's why we try to stay ahead of it here on this network, USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We've been talking about earthquakes for quite some time, but April was Earthquake Preparedness Month, and now that we're into May. Oh, by the way, Nancy, happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. And it's May 4th. Yeah, it's today. Okay. But I had, speaking of the Mississippi and the bridges situation, not only with that, too, you're looking at when you're separating, say, the southeast, with the southeast and the northeast are going to be separated diagonally from the rest of the country. Logistically, that's a nightmare as far as getting stuff across a widened river. But also, like you said too, we've got infrastructure as far as gas and oil lines, and as well as nuclear power plants that we need to worry about as well. So, I mean, it's scary to think about, but if you start to look around you, and a great website to check out, I want to put that out to Nancy, is the Earth Changes in the Pole Shift website. It's poleshift.ning.com. It tracks daily events, whether it be landslides, sinkholes, derailments, plane crashes, earthquakes, volcanoes. There's a blog on there for each individual type of event, and it's a great way to scroll through there and get a lot of information very quickly on one site. That's poleshift.ning.com. So I throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Yeah, and my website is zetatalk, zetatalk.com. But where you want to find what's happening in earth changes, from sinkholes to earthquakes to tidal waves or whatever, the Pole Shift name is where you'll find it.
Excellent. Great talk with you as always, Nancy. I hope it wasn't too much of a bummer for everybody out there, but if you look at the bigger picture of what's happening around the world, you can kind of piece together if you're in a safe location. And the more information you have about where you are, the better you will be when one of these things happens, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah. It's written in the geology of the earth. Just study it. Yes.
And some of the books of the Bible that aren't available, it's written in too. So if you want to get both perspectives there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Nancy, thanks for your time once again. Always a great resource. Check out her website, zetatalk.com or poleshift.ning.com. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you, Andre.
That's all the time we have for situational preparedness for this week. You can catch us on Spreaker, spreaker.com/user/USAEBN, or you can find us on our main page where your 24-hour radio stream is available all the time, www.usaebn.org. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Stay safe out there, and be prepared for earthquakes, volcanoes, and be prepared for earth changes.